we live life on cruise control. We're like, we just keep traveling down the road. And there's a lot of times where we are on cruise and we are not thinking about the decisions we're making. We just do the same crap we've been doing every day. And there's definitely a time where you need to tap into some pattern interruption and say, okay, I need to do something different. I need to switch gears. I need to switch directions. I need to switch things up a little bit and have a little bit of a reset. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Grit Meets Growth podcast, where we bring you inspiration and insights focused on getting uncomfortable, making things happen, and creating a magnetic life. If you enjoy the messages you're hearing here, please leave us a review on whatever platform you're listening on, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes of the podcast. With that, let's get after it.
Let her rip, Tater Chip.
How are you, man?
Beat. I am beat, man. This winter drag in Minnesota, and I know a lot of people around the country have been experiencing some pretty nasty stuff going on. If we look at California and the mountains, and it's been a tough winter, man, and it doesn't seem to be letting up. Here we're sitting at, officially in Minneapolis at 74 inches of snow on the winter, and more coming today and tomorrow. It's looking like we're going to be top 10 snowfall in Minnesota ever in recorded history. And it's just got me in a funk, man. Like, I'm ready. It's, March 9th here that we're recording. I'm ready for spring. I'm ready for the snow to be gone and the birds to be chirping consistently. I'm hearing them, but it's not with any consistency yet.
No, I was just going to say, I heard the birds this morning. I was up early and I heard them outside, and it was weird because I haven't heard them in a long time, which was cool. But with where you're at and just being beat, the number of conversations I've had in the last 3 weeks where people have echoed that exact same thing. Winter is long. Seasons get long, and winter especially gets long. And this one has been brutally long. The darkness, the snow, the travel, everything about it has been brutally long. So
yeah, and it seems like every time you start, getting a little breather from it, and you start getting some traction, to help dig yourself out of that funk, another round of it comes. And it slaps you right upside the head and pushes you back. And then you got to dig out all over again, like literally and figuratively.
So when you're battling the funk, and like I said, you're clearly not alone, because I've been having these conversations for 3 weeks about the funk. How do you dig out of the funk? Like, what do you do? What are you doing to try and scrape, scratch, and crawl your way out of the junk?
I just really focus back on discipline and, just really get back into a grind. And, whether that's, on the sales side and just, reaching out to prospects and, working on messaging and really just shaking trees. Or if it's on the workout front, just trying to do whatever I can, whether it's a workout at home, because I've been really struggling to get to the gym. But it's not that I haven't been working out at all. It's just a different workout.
Do you find that the workout changes your state of mind?
Absolutely. Yeah. I did make it to the gym on Tuesday. Did a new routine, really felt energized from it. It actually carried me through still to today, 2 days later. It really set the tone for me. It set the tone then for me at work, where, again, I just sat down and was like grinding through stuff.
Did you feel like going when you went to the gym? Did you feel
Absolutely
like going
not.
initially?
Dude, okay. So here's the thing. You find me somebody that says they enjoy going to the gym every time. every time they go to the gym, they enjoy it. And I'll say, you're a liar. It's not something that people really, truly enjoy, in my opinion. And it's not about having the motivation to get you there. It's about having the discipline to get you there. And I've struggled, and I really have to dig deep lately to find that discipline to go. Because quite frankly, when it's snowing out, it's cruddy out, it's just, I'm just tired of it. Like I keep asking myself, do I need to change? Do I need some sort of different approach? Do I need a different workout? Shake things up a little bit, different exercises, different routine. What do I need? And I'm kind of been struggling a little bit with that.
I feel like, based on the conversations I've been having lately, I feel like as the season starts to change, the light starts to change, the weather starts to change, the snow starts to go away, and some of the challenges that come with winter in this season that we've been in, as those start to shift, things naturally shift back into a different gear without having to make substantial changes. But then, to your point, you also have to ask your question, what changes do I need to make that are maybe a little bit more substantial? Like, we live life on cruise control. We just keep traveling down the road, and there's a lot of times where we are on cruise and we are not thinking about the decisions we're making. We just do the same crap we've been doing every day. And there's definitely a time where you need to tap into some pattern interruption and say, okay, I need to do something different. I need to switch gears. I need to switch directions. I need to switch things up a little bit and have a little bit of a reset. And exploring what that is, it's going to be different for everybody, but that little pattern interruption and that reset to break what we do every day over and over and over again, those habits we've created and those ruts that we create sometimes, I think that's important.
Yeah, I saw a post this morning that actually really, really timely, seemingly always is, but it was talking about struggle and asking ourselves why, right? Is it something that we're doing wrong? Is the reason we're struggling because we're doing something wrong? Or is the reason we're struggling because we're doing something right and it's challenging? And there's a big differentiator between those two. Big differentiation. I would argue right now, I'm struggling because I'm doing it wrong. Like, I'm falling out of my daily discipline. I'm falling out of doing that work that I committed myself to doing every day. But if we're in the situation where we're doing things right, but it's a struggle, that's really where we want to be. That struggle is what is going to get us and move us forward in that worthwhile pursuit. That's the place that I personally need to get back to from a workout, from a gym perspective. Everything else is going well, right? Everything work related stuff is going well, but it's that personal commitment that I made to myself that I need to get back to.
I think where you're going with that, though, I think when we have the awareness to be able to look and go, I made this commitment to myself, I'm not living it exactly the way I want to, I need to get back on board with that. Awareness is where it starts, to be able to look at the patterns we have and how we're doing things and how we're showing up in life, and be able to say, hey, I said the person I want to become does this. I'm trying to become this person that does this, and I'm a little bit off. I'm out of flow right now. The awareness is what kind of jostles us to get back into flow. And then we can either discipline ourselves to get back into flow and pull ourselves back into flow, or there are people in our circle that will sometimes drag us back into flow, or at least encourage us to get back into flow. It's that combination. It's You have to be able to do some of it yourself. You have to want it bad enough yourself. It has to be important enough to you that you're willing to get uncomfortable to get there. But the other piece of it is too, having friends in the circle that will nudge you back in that direction. Like friends become guardrails. And when they see you kind of hitting the edges or hitting the edges, they'll bump you back into flow. I think that's, both of those are important.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you said, you got to have that self-awareness to be able to go, man, this is tough. And I'll challenge you. When it's tough, just keep going. Just keep going. Like, and you know, for me, I don't have it all figured out, right? It's just about every day taking it on and continuing to move forward. As long as we are continuing forward momentum, and yes, that struggle that we're dealing with internally may still be there, but just keep pushing forward. And eventually you'll find your way out of it. Right? We've talked a lot about it, and I bring this up often in these situations. Like, it's darkest before the dawn. And it's okay to be in situations where things feel dark. It's where seeds are planted, right? We're coming into spring. It's time to plant seeds. And maybe that's what I'm dealing with. I don't know. But it feels a little bit dark at times. And that's okay. Like, I'm okay, and I'm comfortable with that, and I'm embracing that, because I know if I just keep stepping one foot in front of the other, I'll get to the light.
When your point about the seeds get planted down in the dirt. They're planted down in the dirt, in the dark, in the spots where nothing else wants to be. That's where the seeds go, and that's where the growth starts. We see the growth when it starts to poke out into the light. There's been a lot of activity that's happened down in the dirt before the sprout is something we can see. And I think that's exactly true. And the dark piece, I think there's a lot of content out there right now where people are talking about the light piece, like all the good stuff. Just do this, just do that. If you do this, everything's going to be perfect. There's less people talking about dark. And dark is part of being human. Like, we're all going to have that thing that we struggle with. What you're going through today is something I went through 3 months ago. And everyone who's listening to this, you're either in a storm, you're coming out of a storm, or there's one coming. Those are the three options. Nobody does this without storms and without some struggles along the way. Having conversations about that is important.
Well, yeah, in a storm, I mean, let's face it, there isn't any storm that's going to last forever. And if we look at the weather patterns in the storm, they don't last forever. They come and they go. And that's the same thing with the storms in our lives. They come and they go. You just have to be able to weather them. And that comes down to your own mental toughness and your own drive and your own discipline to be able to do that. The darkness piece. We can't have light in this wonderful light without darkness. We wouldn't appreciate the light and everything that happens in the light without the darkness. We all have to go through those storms and those darkness in order to get to the light and the sunshine.
I had a guy who worked for me at one point, and I've always thought this was interesting. I walked into work one morning, and he made the comment, "Just pisses me off." And I'm like, let's elaborate on that a little bit. What pisses you off? Like, right? Like, where's your head at? And he goes, "I'm sick of people telling me that I have to be happy all the time." Okay. Dig into that a little further. And he said, here's the deal. Like, there's a middle part. There's baseline. And I live a lot of my life at baseline. Sometimes I dip below baseline and I'm having a negative day or a sad day or an angry day, and I'm below baseline. And then I have days where I'm way above baseline. I've having these mountaintop experiences. Everything is awesome. But most of the time I'm in the middle. I'm not up or I'm down. I'm just in the middle. I'm at baseline. And I wish people would be okay with baseline, because I'm okay with it. But everyone keeps telling me I have to be high all the time. Like, it's got to be mountaintop experiences all the time. And I don't believe that. And when he said that, it challenged my thinking a little bit, because I'm probably one of those people who's like, let's chase mountaintop stuff, right? It's not realistic. there's mountaintop. The reason the mountaintop feels so good and the view is so good is because you're not up there all the time. If you were up there all the time, the view would be not as exciting to you. It wouldn't feel the same. But when you live most of your days at baseline and you look at baseline and you're content with that, and you know you're building toward a mountaintop thing, but you also realize that you're not going to stay at the mountaintop. You get to the top of Everest. If you get to the top of Everest, you have to pass through the death zone to get there. And when you get to the top, if you were to stay at the top, you would die. You go up, you enjoy the view, and then you start the journey back down in a relatively quick amount of time, because if you try and stay there, you will be dead. And I think that's kind of that same thing. We can't stay high all the time. There's got to be a return to baseline where we prep for maybe the next high, but also know that there's going to be a low that comes as well. You can't avoid it.
Yeah. You can't build a race car engine that runs at maximum RPM for long periods of time. It's the same thing with our lives, right? We have to be able to build our engine so that we can run fast, but do it for a long time. And I think that's what you're talking about when you talk about baseline, right? Baseline's not about settling. It's still about running and running at peak performance, but we can't run at the top of the mountain, right? We can't run at the top RPMs consistently. We can get there for a short period of time, but then we need to come back.
Absolutely. You're 100% on. That's exactly where I was going with that. And I think one of the things that we encounter when we have these moments, we're in a struggle, we're in a dark place, we're in a little bit of a funk. I think there's room in there to tap back into gratitude, to look backward and think about, look at where you are right now. Think about all the things you have to be grateful for right now today. But then also to be able to look backward a little bit and replay some of your highlight reel, like some good things that have happened, and realize that when you look back at the highlight reel, you're not going to stay in the dark. I think that's the biggest challenge when you're in a dark spot or you're in a struggle spot. It's easy to get stuck in, it's going to be like this forever, and kind of get to a hopeless kind of spot. And I think if you can look back at the highlight reel, you can look at all the things you're grateful for and start to believe, then you got to believe it. You got to believe there's something on the other side. You get to that point, all of a sudden doors will start to open to get out of the funk and out of the junk.
Well, think of that plant. Think of that seed. Think about all that energy that's required of that seed to break through the surface. Right? That seed has to germinate, has to get a sprout. That sprout has to drive towards the light, drive towards the warmth. Takes that energy. You've got to put that energy into it so that you can break through the surface and get to the light. It's the same effort. And you asked me earlier, what am I doing? Right? What do you do? And I think that for me, it's really embracing the discipline that got me to where I'm at and where I was in the light before the storm hit, and really embrace that and bring that back to the forefront and drive my energy there. And for me, a lot of that it's social. I'm a social creature. And so driving some additional social interaction in my life will help me drive out of this funk.
Yeah, absolutely. The seed thing that you're talking about, there's a pine tree, and I don't want to hack up this description, but there's a pine tree that drops its pine cones, and the only way for the seeds that are in the pine cones to crack open is for them to go through fire. And so the forest fire comes and it gets so hot that all of a sudden the seed will burst open. And because of that heat, now more seeds can grow. It's kind of that same thing with the seed in the ground. This is seed in the fire. There are times where we have to go through some fire to get to where we want to go. And it's never comfortable. The heat that kind of heat never feels good. It's never fun. It's never enjoyable, but there are things that are going on in your life right now that you have to get through to get to the other side. And the growth is going to come, but it can be painful in the moment for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I think it requires us to, as I'm thinking about, as I'm listening to you explain that and what we've been talking about, it takes some reflection. Like we have to be able to reflect upon our priorities, reflect upon our time and where we're spending it, where we're giving energy, where energy is being taken from us, and find a place of protection as it relates to that. Like sometimes, I look at it as we have to kind of pull the rubber band back so that we can propel and shoot forward, right? And the only way we can do that is if we think about our time and our energy and where it's being used or where it's being taken, and protect that so that we can pull that rubber band back and propel ourselves forward.
We just talked to our team about that. We were doing kind of an annual kickoff, talking about where we're going this year and what the year looks like. And we talked a little bit about potential and the concept of potential energy. And if you have a spring and you just hold on to the spring and it's just sitting there, there's no potential energy in it. It's just sitting there, right? Mm-hmm. But the second you compress the spring or you stretch the spring, now there's potential energy, because when you let it go, something's going to happen. And I think we all have potential energy, but in order to get to that, we got to get squeezed a little bit or stretched a little bit. And there's that, we have to allow ourselves to get squeezed and stretched. And I think sometimes we resist that because it can be challenging, it can be uncomfortable. But when you're just sitting there and you're not being squeezed a little bit or stretched a little bit, nothing happens. That's status quo. That's where things just sit, nothing happens, nothing changes, and you get what you have continually gotten because you haven't changed what you're doing. I think it requires us to, just to trip on that a little bit, I think it requires us to think a little bit differently. Like there's times where the way that you've been thinking about things or the solutions you've looked at for your challenges are based on what everybody else is using for solutions to the challenges. You got to think kind of counterintuitive, and you got to think like differently about how things work. Like, and I'll use the electric car analogy a little bit on this. And I'm not saying everybody should buy an electric car. That's not where I'm going with this at all. But like,
thank goodness.
But when they started going down the path of, hey, maybe cars don't need gas, that was counterintuitive, because up until that point, cars ran on gas. And I think there's room in our life to think kind of with that same mindset. Like maybe I don't need to do things the way I've always done them. Maybe there's some different way. And maybe it's a way that not everybody else does things. We get so good at following the herd and making decisions on how we're going to do things based on how everybody else does things. And if you do that, you're going to get the same results as everybody else. And when I look around, that's not what I want. I want something a little bit different. And so there's this constant challenge of the thought process and how I think. And I think you do the same thing. I've seen you do it, trying to think different and not just settle into what everybody else does. It's way too easy.
Well, and not even what everybody else does, but what you have been doing. Right? As I'm hearing you say that, like our path to success or individuals' path to success is never a straight line, right? We've discussed that. I think we can all agree upon that. Which in my mind says I can't continue to do the same thing. Like if whatever I'm doing today is only going to get me so far. I have to change. I have to adjust. I have to morph. If I don't do that, I'm never going to get to what my goal and what I'm wanting to achieve are. That greatness or whatever it is, right? For you. Like, we have to make adjustments. We have to be able to self-reflect on things. What's working, what's not. Because even when the sunshine is bright and we're living in that top of the mountain scenario, there are aspects of what we did to get there that could be better, that are going to propel us to the next mountaintop. And as we talked about, the chances are we're going to have to descend before we climb again. And I think that's where that self-reflection kind of comes in. That's where those aspects come together.
Well, just to dovetail on that for a second, you said you got to define what greatness is for you. And I think when we look at, like, we're all chasing performance or success, right? What performance is and what success is different for me than it is for you. And it's going to be different for everybody who's listening to this right now. If I asked you, define success for me, it'd be easy to define it by, I'm going to call it culture terms. Maybe it's money, and maybe it's career, and maybe it's professional. And that's how I'm going to define success. But I know a lot of people who don't define it that way. They define it as, am I a good dad? How's my marriage? How are my relationships with other people? How's my fitness? How do I feel? Like there's a lot of ways to define success that aren't necessarily tied to professional, money, career, right? And maybe for you, professional, money, career is the big thing. Everybody who's listening to this is going to have different definitions, but you got to get clear on what your definition is so that you can start to move that direction. And your definition, not somebody else's.
Well, and I think too, like, as we're defining what that is, and as you listed all of those items, whether it's career-based or personal or relationship or religious, whatever it happens to be, like, there's a part that every single one of those components plays in your success. Pick one item, and all of those other play supporting roles. Right? Everybody wants balance. There's no such thing as balance. There's going to be things that are up and down all the time. There is no such thing as balance in that. Your goals as it relates to business may be here today, and some of these other things are going to suffer, right? Your relationships may suffer, your personal goals may suffer, and as you start to try to rise those, sometimes, your business goals tend to come down. That trying to find that balance doesn't exist. The seesaw is forever rising and falling.
It reminds me of like a spider web, where there's all these components that make up the strings of the spider web. And if I pull in one spot, everything moves in that direction or away from that direction. Like, when you're saying that, I think about, if I'm having a challenging week at home, it impacts how I show up at work, and vice versa. If I'm having a challenging week at work, it impacts how I show up at home. You can't pull those strings one direction or the other and not have the other strings pull. They would just tear. And that's not the way it works. They are all interconnected and intertwined really tight. And
that's the key right there, John. You can't pull too hard. You can't pull too hard, or it all comes apart. Challenging day, certainly. It's going to pull you a little bit away. And yes, that home front's going to be pulled a little bit, but the goal is to not pull it too far. That's, okay, so maybe we get back to some sort of balance, but they're never equal. But the idea is to get them close, but they'll never be equal.
That is the biggest lie that we've ever been told, is that you can have that perfect balance. It doesn't exist. Everything is too interwoven together. And there's always going to be the moment where, like we said, professional is going to take a little bit more of a priority, and relationships are going to suffer a little bit. And then relationships are going to take more of a priority, and professional, the back and forth there is a constant. There is no perfect balance, to your point. And it's once we quit chasing that and we're okay with it. But again, it goes back to defining what success is. So that when you're out of alignment with what your version of success is, you can feel it and you can see it and you can know it. You've studied it enough. You know what the answer is. When I ask you what is success to you, you have an answer on the tip of your tongue. Now you can measure the areas of your life and go, is this aligned or not? And when it's not, you know it and you can adjust it.
Yeah, for sure.
This is a good conversation, specifically from the perspective of everything you and I are talking about. Everyone who's listening to this is experiencing at the same time. This is like
yeah, and it may not be at the same time, but everybody's experiencing it at some point in time.
And I would say, so say you've got one area of your life where you're not experiencing it. I'm going to double down and bet that you have another area of your life where you are. There's always something in your life that you could be tweaking or you could be making a little bit different because you're a little challenged in that area. And the height of the highs and the lows varies. Like sometimes you're just a little bit out of flow and sometimes you're way out of flow. Sometimes you're really high and sometimes you're just a little bit high, but like there's always something that's a little off kilter. I don't think we ever get to a point where we're like, no, everything's good. Anyone who says that is probably lying to you.
Well, they're lying to themselves, right? And I think it comes down to really reflecting on your own situation, asking yourself, why are those things off? Why is whatever it happens to be off? And what can I do about it to right that? How can I pull on that spider web without pulling too hard and get things back into some sort of alignment?
That ability to slow down and reflect, I think, is between now and the next episode. If everyone who's listening to this just spend some time, set aside some time, early in the morning, late at night, wherever you can fit it in, set up some time every day to reflect a little bit and think about where you're at, think about how you're feeling, think about how things are going, and develop some of that self-awareness so that you can start to make those subtle tweaks that you need to make. And I think that's the other thing. There's going to be times where you need to make a big tweak. You got to make a big change. A lot of what we're talking about is subtle tweaks and subtle changes. Move the dial just a little bit. Don't get so wrapped up in I need to do something massive. Move your dial just a little bit. Get aware of where you need to move the dial, and then give it a little bit of a tweak and see what happens.
Yeah, I think, the world moves really fast and time is clicking by faster than ever, right? I used to laugh at my parents when they said, the older you get, the faster time goes. It's reality. I don't know why it is, but it's reality. So taking those opportunities to slow down our lives, take that opportunity to think, give yourself a window of time every day to think. Sometimes you're going to have ideas and you want to write them down. Other times you just need to sit in peace and think and reflect and think about goals and where you're going and think about those items, those dials you need to turn.
If you do that, you slow down and you make the time during the day to think. The one warning I'm going to put out there is if you haven't done that before, if you've been on cruise control or autopilot for a long time and you haven't made time to think, the first time you do it, it's going to be super uncomfortable. And you're going to want to get back to the same crap you were doing, keeping yourself busy and not thinking. It's because the discomfort and the tension it's going to create when you first start to do it is going to feel kind of weird. Stay in that moment for a little bit and come back to it the next day and come back to it the next day. And the more that you make time to think, the more comfortable it's going to get. And you will hit a spot where things will start to flow out of your mind and get clear. that you haven't had before, but you got to get through that initial discomfort. It's like going to the gym. First 2 weeks suck because you haven't done it before and you got to get your body used to it. This is the same thing. You got to get your mind used to it. When you do, cool stuff will happen.
Right on. So
Right on, man.
go find some time to think, turn your dials, pull your spider webs, get yourself back on track. Make it a great day and get after it.
See you later, man. That wraps it up for today's episode. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for being part of the Grit Meets Growth tribe. And thanks for growing along with us and being part of this journey together. If you know someone who needs to hear the conversation we had today, please share it. If you got something out of this conversation, please leave us a review. And finally, if you want to make sure you don't miss future episodes, just remember to subscribe. We're thankful for each and every one of you. And as my co-host and good friend Chris Cathers always says, make it a great day.